remind you.
I should have recorded it sooner. Thank you. So where we are in our path, I started with some agreements that had we been together in person, I would have had everybody sign on a piece of paper. And the ones that really matter, let me close the door. Ones that really matter, the first one is timeliness. And we're going to work with a whole section on agreements, but the ones that matter, this is timeless, so we can start and stop together efficiently. And the other one is to remind you that it's about you changing you. And in workshops I have with business teams, no matter how many times I say that, and it's on about 20 slides, somebody will come up to me or ask in the room, I can't do something about thus and thus because of so-and-so, and I bring it back to Gandhi's quote, that you must be the change you want to see in the world. And that's the best you can do. Changing other people is a waste of time. Then I think one of the most important ideas in this whole work, and only one other individual in the world's ever talked about this to my knowledge, and that's the idea of the social context field and how powerful it is. And I talked through studies with first Challenger and then Hubble, and then the Fukushima Daiichi explosion and the Max problem, on and on and on. It's ubiquitous. And it's by Diane Vaughan's book, which first got me thinking about this. These are unacknowledged and invisible fields. And she's right about that. So we talked about that. And everything after is kind of a piece of that, breaking it down. This idea about mindset, which is, I think, so crucial. It sets up the platform for the behavior. And again, we use the tool to analyze, to take something like attitude or mindset, a complicated idea, simplified into two things that you can easily understand, emotions and storylines. And Nat asked me about these colors, and I explained that. And the first application of this was to the idea of a personality that's innate. And this is not an idea original to me. I got this from Carl Jung, the German psychologist. And we're going to use the tool over and over and over to do things, make it simpler. So with personality, we use the tool to separate into four colors, which I've found through the years is the easiest way for people to refer to this. And you guys did things like watch movie films and diagnose personalities. I think you've all done the exercise, the homework exercise with your friend or spouse on this, and we've talked about who you each are. And that's a fun piece. And then the next thing is how we do things, or what's culture. I don't like words like culture because people use them in very, very dissimilar ways. But to me, it's just how we choose to do things. This is important to me in sort of an intellectual completeness sense, but I think this is one of the less actionable pieces of the work. So I don't emphasize this, and if it's a time critical workshop, I just skip this section, but we have time, so I'm going to go through this with you. Richard Feynman, the Caltech physicist, one of my personal heroes, and he got a Nobel Prize for what are called Feynman diagrams. And these are sub-nuclear processes, and these are wave functions interacting and how that works. This is all complicated physics. But I'm thinking if you can diagram that, you can probably diagram cultures. And the interesting thing about cultures is there's not an innate personality piece to it, except in the sense that the work that's being done and the history of the organization tends to give more strength in one culture than the other. And we want cultures to have all four dimensions, just like we want individuals. So what we're doing here is applying the exact same methodology that we use for individual personalities, innate personalities, to groups of people. And there are four cultures, and I'll put in here some examples. The green cultures address members' deep, usually human values, things like Habitat for Humanity, Greenpeace, churches. These are all green cultures. Yellow cultures address members' relational needs. And I joined some time back a group of consultants in Denver that were all yellow. I didn't have the color code at the time, but their idea of a good meeting was we spend the first 2 hours talking about, where's the best bargains in ski clothing and the Broncos and things like this. And I'm like, when am I going to get to work and get something done? After about 6 months, I couldn't take it anymore and left. It's all about relationship, my diagonal. The most interesting example of the blue culture is research universities like University of Colorado. And that's how you get power. That's how you get promoted, by papers you write. And in the diagrams, I'm trying to show you some clues into how people prefer to interact. If you talk to university professors about the thing they hate most, is probably faculty meetings. They hate sitting around groups and talking. How do you think they prefer to communicate? Probably with email, right? Rather than in person. And all governments are orange. It's about rules, process, laws. And so these are work environments. Any comments or questions so far? How we doing? Okay.
Just a quick comment, Charlie.
Yeah,
You mentioned last session about NASA being orange, and I thought that was interesting because I love the work I did there, and I love the people, but the culture and the environment drove me insane most of the time, and I never looked at it the way you just did. I used to tell people it was like a cat being pet the wrong direction. That's what I felt like in that environment. And but your orange, your orange lens is a better way to think about it. Yeah.
So all Gaul is divided into 3 parts, and NASA is divided into 3 parts. What this is. Sorry about that. Just let it ring. So you may know that NASA has 3 totally orange centers. The 3 human flight centers. Marshall is probably the orangest of any. There's no blue. They have scientists there, but they disliked them so much that they finally moved them outside the gate into a separate building. They couldn't even stand having them on the same ground with them. Johnson is pure orange, but has a little bit of innovation, and KSC is orange. So they're the orange of the orange. And for people that aren't familiar with these, that's the human flight centers, and it was formed for Apollo. And so the job was to integrate a whole lot of contractors and entities all around into some single system that could fly to the moon and back and carry people safely. That's an orange job. I mean, that's a systems management job. The parts all have to fit together. So that's the orangest part of NASA. The second orangest is the 2 robotics centers, Goddard and JPL, and they're orange also. And why do I say they're orange? Because you get promoted for doing things on cost and schedule. You don't get promoted for being innovative. But they do nurture strong science organizations in both. JPL has a pretty good science part, and Goddard also. Then there's the 3 NACA centers, which is where you worked. And these were formed before NASA, this National Advisory Committee, something like that. Anyway, they're the bluest of the blue. And their problem is they're so blue, they cannot get together the critical mass to do project management, which is basically orange. So Ames is probably the bluest. They've never done project managed anything. Glenn, where you worked, and Langley have had little islands of blue. You guys built launch vehicles out of Glenn early on, and a little bit of the solar panels for the space station. And Langley, interestingly enough, was the birthplace of Johnson. It existed before Johnson. And so there's sort of the blue outliers, those 3 centers. There's the 2 hybrids, and there's the 3 oranges. That's the nature of the agency. Headquarters, of course, is just orange, orange, orange. It's all about process and method. So the reason it's interesting to me is most people think of NASA as blue. It's not. When I was a young lad, we had a speech by the deputy administrator in the auditorium, and he said something I never forgot. The job of NASA is to do the most audacious possible things in the most conservative possible manner.
It's a good description.
Yeah, it's really, so thanks for bringing that up. Hope that was interesting. To
I,
the rest of
you know, I worked at Johnson for a while too. I worked at
Okay.
both of those centers, and then I worked with all the centers. And I think what you just said in a skim overview is pretty accurate with my sense of it too. It's very interesting. But even the blue centers, like you said, that orange is always there. It's kind of
Yep,
because
yep.
it is a government, you know, a
That's
government
right.
agency.
Exactly. Yep. And so here's the question. Is yours only 1D? And so why does this happen? Because business particularly is all about certainty of result, numbers, profits, accounting, so forth. And as I mentioned, it works the same way as the innate personality. As this gets more and more, you lose the green, people don't feel valued, and this is like being in this condition is like burning money up. What you'd like to have is the lead, just like an individual, the lead to match the work that should be done. And so you're arguably got an orange lead. And the other three above what I call threshold level, which means they're strong enough not to impede the main work. So you're trying to achieve an orange goal of profitability or competitive advantage or market share or whatever. You want to have the relationship to be good enough, relationship element, the marketing part, so you keep loyal customers and keep your teams together with harmony. The green, people have to feel valued. Again, all the stakeholders and some innovation. And this was the work I did with mostly TRW and proposals. And if your lead of your culture matches your customer, no matter what you're doing, whether you're proposing or running a project, all's going to be good. And when it mismatches, you're going to have nothing but trauma. And I talked about the mismatch with Hubble, with the very blue PerkinElmer. These are the people who are going to try and build the world's best mirror. And the Marshall people that are orangest of orange, and how that was inherently a disconnect. This is a book by two Harvard professors. Firms that built cultures that fit the strategy grew net income 5 to 10 times faster than other companies. For those of you not familiar, net income is business speak for profit. What they're talking about is when the culture matched what you're trying to do, this happened. And when the culture didn't match, this is what happens. Powerful stuff, not 5 to 10% faster, 5 to 10 times faster. So I used to have a tool that measured all four elements of the culture, but then I realized with the online tool, I'm already getting the most important element of the green, that is the appreciation behavior, and the most important element of the yellow, which is the inclusion piece. So I modified the tool, always trying to make things simpler, to find out whether blue or orange leads the culture. And typically, they're, with the exception of one business, a Brazilian company, a book written by Ricardo Stimler, that's the only yellow culture I've ever found. Everything else is either going to be about innovation or blue. You could argue training companies are green, but I think in the end, they've got to be four-dimensional, and probably orange, they got to make money in the end to survive. So this is my little take on this. Who has the power? The technical wizards or the hierarchical management? And again, it's crystal clear. You go to the research centers, and people tend to listen to the bright people. Marshall cares only about the hierarchy. You could look at Tesla over here if you wanted, and Ford over here, unstructured and free. In fact, Tesla's a hyperbole of a blue culture. Elon Musk, you're available to meet with him any day, anytime. Anyone that tries to interfere with that gets fired. Of course, you do that at your peril. Here, you go up the line. Performance is everything, and here, budget's everything. Tends to be very ad hoc. People tend to sort of do things as they want, and everything here is documented discipline. And I think following the blue personality, communications are brutally frank. I don't think it'd be unusual for Elon Musk to use expletives talking with people. And when you're in the orange culture, no matter how bad the disagreement is, the conversations are polite and tempered. So with that, you can go through, and blue cultures are really driven by meeting the experts' needs. Inclusion is not by how you sit in meetings and behave, it's about your accomplishments, Nobel Prizes and publications. The vision is winning through creativity. And this is the organization chart. Believe it or not, this is how the University of Colorado actually works. I could not believe it till I was there for 2 years. The power is all with the faculty decide everything. The president's a figurehead. So I was the strategic advisor to the dean, which is this black box here. So I asked him, "What's the dean's job?" And here's what he told me. He said the dean's job. The president's job is to make speeches and make money, to get money. The faculty's job is to think. The dean's job is to make sure the president doesn't think and the faculty don't make speeches. And the diagonal challenge, of course, is relationships. The oranges, it's all about certainty of result. Inclusion is strictly according to the chart. The vision is winning through process, and the power is through the chart. So when I was at NASA, all the benefits flowed to the top management, taking care of ourselves first and next and next. We even had executive lunchroom. We weren't going to eat with these peons. It's the hierarchical structure is really a big deal. And of course, the challenge is caring for people. So I find this interesting. I saw this at NASA. Directive cultures perceive control as central. You must appear to be in control. This is more important than anything else. And the way this shows up is that people like me or the administrator are expected to be able to recite endless, meaningless technical details. The best example of this was the administrator truly was going over to the White House to talk about the Hubble mirror flaw. And he called me from his car phone, asked me if I could explain the modulation transfer function in the fine guidance sensors of Hubble, which I could do, which I should never have to do. So I think this is I make a little story about this. The way this happens is that the thing comes more and more and more, and I call it the data dog gets in control. So the story is about a guy who has a next door neighbor, just moved in, and the next door neighbor comes over and says, I just had a death in the family. I've got to go out of town. Could you please take care of my dog? And he looks over and sees this dog there, and he says, it's a really nice dog. He said, you don't have to do much. So just go in there twice a day. And it's got a little door. He can go in and out, go to the bathroom. All you got to do is go feed his bowl of food and water. And he's just the friendliest little dog. So you're not sure you want to do this, but you say, okay, sure, you're a new neighbor. I'll help out. So you go in there. You're in the kitchen. The dog blocks your escape, starts growling at you menacingly. You're scared to death. You're backing up. You reach behind the counter and there's a bag of dog biscuits. So you start throwing the biscuits to the dog. But there's a problem. You're running out. With the data dog in business, you must never run out of biscuits. You got to keep feeding that data dog over and over and over. So probably the biggest reason I was finally glad to leave NASA headquarters was the data dog. It was the coming up with next year's personnel counts, the travel budget for 2 years out, and all kinds of nonsensical things that somebody needed for the data dog. So that's my little metaphor for the overarching function of the orange culture going amok, which it usually does. So 4D salute, on your feet. Cleaning the toxins out, moving your muscles. Yeah, it felt good. So here's a healthy business organization, and it's really interesting to me that the core elements of a business also match up with the 4 personality colors. The employee development, the organization is green. Marketing is necessarily yellow. We buy on relationship. The research is necessarily blue, and manufacturing is necessarily orange. You need consistent product. So a good organization will let each of these operate in the way that it wants. What's much more common is for the data dog to take control and turn everything as orange as they can get it. This bogs everything down. The worst offenders usually employee development. People always comment HR never gets their action items done on time, on and on and on. So I want to give you an example of the work I did with proposal teams. And so normally in an aerospace proposal, major competition, there's good technical teams and lots of money. So the technical proposals are almost always pretty good. And I'm going to show you that if your approach matches your customers, if you're both blue, you'll win. If you mismatch, you'll likely not, especially if your competition does. So here's the problem. Under stress, and proposals are stressful. They're the most stressful things I know, frankly, because everything's ambiguous. It's always must win from the management. And so under stress, you're going to revert to the habits of your culture. As you get more and more pressure, you're going to go into your comfort zone. The same thing happens with individuals. The more stressed that I became, the more blue I got, and the less yellow I became, and had to sort of stop and breathe to fight that.
Charlie?
Yo.
Yeah, so just something I was noticing when you said that is that when you said comfort zone, that comfort zone could actually be a pretty uncomfortable place. Is that what you're kind of saying?
No, not really. What I'm saying is that, Lauren, what's your color?
Green.
So under stress, do you find yourself going into the green area? Do you find yourself taking refuge in that? That's what's comfortable for you, those storylines and emotions in the green?
I see. So you're saying the color is a reflection of where we go to under stress.
It's home base. It's comfort for us.
Got it.
As I get under stress, I go more into idea space. I go more into concept space. I gravitate toward the ideas because that's comfort for me.
I got it now. Thanks.
And the problem with that is that at that space, I don't give a damn about the relationships. I can't be bothered. It's just a nuisance. And so that's not a good place to be. The same thing happens with proposal teams, and I'll show you an example here in a second how this works. Okay, thank you. So this is now a reality. At the time, this was just a cartoon. So I want you to color these statements blue or orange. Your customer wants an 8-meter cold telescope for $500 million. Hubble Space Telescope was 2.4 meters and cost $3 billion. What color can believe that's reality? The blue, right? Nobody else could imagine this. By the way, cold means 30 degrees above absolute zero. Hubble was room temperature. That's how much easier it was. Because of who you are, you get people like you on the team. And so his team's got the best and brightest scientists running the proposal, and they've got intellectual air superiority. What color is the team? It's blue. This is my customer at the time. You really want to win, so you put your Mr. Manager in charge, who recently completed a telescope on cost and schedule. He selects experienced engineers for his team. What color is he? Orange. Okay. Mr. Customer sees advanced technology as the only path to success. Of course, that's right. There's nothing in reality that could make this thing happen. Conventional designs are backup. So what's he want to buy? Blue. You know better. This is you, my customer. Proven approaches will win. What color? Your team, the proposal team, focuses on developing details that increasingly show the implausibility of the customer's vision. The more work you do, the more you're telling the customer he's wrong, because you know he's wrong. Your competitor put a scientist with no hardware experience in charge. This is reality. This is what really happened. This is not fictional. Risky high promise solutions. You are sure these will not appeal to the customer. He will choose your expensive conventional design. Is there any chance you'll win this competition? 0. Okay. Everybody see this? So here's the problem. Here's Mr. Other Company's scientist management design approach. Here's the decision makers. Here's you. What's the root problem? You hired this guy based on his track record. We like people who are like ourselves. He populated a team with oranges. The guy on the orange bus put on their orange glasses and drove down the road. So what happened here was interesting. I saw this early on, and I put together a briefing, and I went to the guy running the thing. Name was Ralph. And I said, Ralph, let me show you what's going on here. He says, Charlie, I got it. And I said, well, how about this? Can I go around and take this briefing to all the subs too? He said, yeah, sure. You got it. You're spot on. So I wasn't around when they wrote the proposal. Junko and I did a home exchange with a house in Holland for the summer. So I was out of the country all summer. And I came back and they asked me to be on the red team for their proposal, which was basically finished. Red team is a review process where you're standing in for the customer. They asked me to do that because I'd been their customer when I was at NASA. So I'm reading the proposal and I said, oh my God, it's completely wrong. You've not shown anything blue. The proposal is completely orange. And I said to Ralph, look what you've done here. You're going to lose this. He said, we did exactly what you said. He couldn't even see it until I took a yellow marker and showed sentence by sentence how he had made everything orange and ignored the blue. So they turned around and they modified the proposal with me doing it line by line. They couldn't even see it in their own writing. This is the power of this stuff. Everybody got this? Kind of what we're talking about? So I was later asked to work on a proposal for the space-based laser. This is an idea of this is not a laser like the type you think of. This is a chemical laser, very high-powered laser. And the idea is that there's a whole suite of satellites that detect missile launches essentially immediately. So if you could detect a North Korean missile launch in the early phase of one of these ballistic missiles, they're very vulnerable. They're moving very slowly and the fuel tanks are full. They're typically liquid fueled motors. The idea was if you could take a laser in space, you could swing it around, put enough energy in the side of this ICBM, you could explode it before it got very high and moving fast in the atmosphere, above the atmosphere. Great idea. So they asked me to be on a team for this called the Black Hat team, where in this case, I'm simulating the competition. So I'm sitting in the room. Here's what I'm seeing. My client is feeling really good about proposing. They've got the world's greatest wizards scientists in their company. Yep, they're technology leaders in this kind of laser. Trent Lott at the time was an influential congressman. What he wants is flaming wreckage ASAP. In other words, he wants the thing to get funded. And he knows that trying to get a long-term funding for this is going to be an uphill push. He wants a demonstration where they can blow something up. What color is he? Mr. Air Force, this is the customer, feels other things are higher priority than this laser. He's got to do this because of the Congress, but his manager to focus on minimizing cost and schedule, get this thing out the door. What color is your customer? You quickly charge your Mr. Wizard to form a proposal team of best and brightest, most innovative people. What color is your team? You hear your competition has put a seasoned manager in charge. Mrs. Other Company, who's pushing a plain Jane approach. What color is she?
Orange.
You have the advanced technology for the 21st century, but no financially viable model for an operational system exists. In other words, no one can imagine the fuel and funding for this thing being realistic in any budget. You're blue. Your people are confident. The Air Force technical wizards who are not involved in the selection process, however, love your advanced concept. So what have you done? You've done confirmation bias. You've selected out the information that supports your viewpoint. Is there any chance you win this competition? So I actually stood up at a conference and made a 30-minute presentation. I was there with about a dozen other consultants, and everyone else was there, how we're going to write the proposal to win. And I showed them this basic presentation and said, you cannot possibly win. And they said, what's the root problem? It's the same thing. You picked the blue to form your team. You pick people like him. They got on the blue bus with the blue eyeglasses. They said, we're screwed, aren't we? I said, yeah, you are. So I said, what do we do? I said, what you do is what you often do. You go talk to Lockheed Martin, that was the competitor, and you say, let's go see the government together and let's argue that the best approach is a national team. You build a spacecraft and get the early money for that, and we'll work on laser technology. We both get something. Other than that, if on the path you're on, you're going to get nothing. And that's exactly what they did, and it worked. They got the money for the lasers. Isn't this simple?
Actually, no.
That's it.
So I just want to say the last 5, 6, 7 slides, I will have to go through the recording. I'm not going to interrupt now, but this is really going to take me time. It's not that easy. And I mean, for you, it is. You're running through it. It's fine. We have the recording, but I really need to spend much more time on this.
Yeah, I
That's
think
all.
you do, because you're working with interfaces that's, you're trying to cover, trying to work with entrepreneurs, which are blue, and the government, which is orange, and they're never going to meet. And so you need to understand this, Nico, because you're going to have to put on a different face for each of these crowds.
Absolutely, absolutely. But just one comment is, yeah, I'm much more aware of it and working on myself, to increase all the colors to accommodate, obviously, different segments of society.
So we did a little culture quiz, and in the workshop, we would have actually done the quiz, talked about the different cultures, how they're so different, how you're going to win if you match, and you're going to lose if you don't. I had a phone call early on. I was at CU teaching my classes, and someone heard about me, and he called me up and said, we just made a big proposal to Ball Aerospace for a building complex, and I want to know if you think we're going to win or not. And I said, well, tell me about your proposal. And he described these very high-tech buildings, very modern design, all glass everywhere. So we build the most advanced, elegant architecture in the country. These are buildings that are going to stand out everywhere. And I said, who's going to make the selection? And they said, it's going to be the facilities management team at Ball. And I said, you're going to lose. I said, what do you mean? I said, go take a look at what kind of buildings they like. They're plain, they're drab. It's a low-cost place. He said, damn, we're screwed, aren't we? I said, yep. So he said, okay. So 2 weeks later, he called me back, said, yep, we lost exactly as you said. There's been occasions when I gave this advice and people didn't pay any attention. So one of my favorites is I was brought in to help with, so Northrop Grumman bought TRW, and Northrop Grumman had a group separate from the group I'd been working with at TRW to write a proposal for back to the moon. The Bush administration is going to go back to the moon. So this was the part of the company that mostly did things like aircraft and whatnot. So they told the other part of the company doing the moon proposal that the guy to call me. So they called me up and we talked for about a half an hour with some HR person and the project leader for the thing. I talked about what I did. And he said, well, we'll get back to you. I didn't hear anything. About 6 months go by and he calls me up and says, we're 2 months away from submitting our proposal and need your help. And I said, well, it's kind of late now. He said, well, come on out, let's see what we can do. So the first thing I did was sit down with the team leader and the team and went through a personality diagnostic with them. The team leader was green. The team he'd put together was all green. And they're proposing the Johnson Space Center. And I said, Johnson Space Center is orange. You're going to lose. And I said, what do you mean we're going to lose? We're in the top slot. I said, you're going to lose. They're not going to never pick green. Your thing is full of human values, and they're looking for certainty of result. So I said, I'm going to speak to the top management about this. And they said, no, we're not going to let you do that. I said, okay. So with the TRW, I had access to the CEO of the company anytime I wanted. They knew me, and I could walk in their office and they would listen to me. Here, I didn't know these people, so I couldn't do anything. So I'm traveling in Europe at the time, and I'm watching this in the Financial Times. This competition is being reported every day. It says we're 1 week away from the decision, and we're certain Lockheed Martin, Northrop Grumman's going to win. And I said, no, they're not, just to myself. I'm showing Junko every day in the paper. Next day, decision's coming very soon now, and stock's going up. Northrop Grumman's going to win. I said, no, they're not. So then 2 more days go by, same reporting in the financial news. They've got it wrapped up. Next day, headline, stunner. Northrop Grumman loses. Said, I told you. Green will never win. A green proposal will never be picked by orange when the competitor's proposing orange. So attention to the shape, the behavior, match your team culture to lead to the task, and so forth. So we've got 9 minutes left. The next section, I can proceed to the next section, or we can have open mic here. What do you guys want to do? Anybody?
I think if maybe to Nico's point, just going back a bit and talking about
Yeah,
how does this work in reality? I mean, I
yeah.
I
So
work
let me
of
ask
all
you
of you, I
this.
think I'm the only person working for government. So it's really, for me, it's amazing to hear the other side story of how do things go. Because, for example, for us, there is scoring, and then there is a good chunk of like 30% that's relevant, that's related to the price. So sometimes we have a company that does really great on scoring, but they're really comparing to other companies so highly priced that it just wipes them out. So it's like, for me, it's really interesting how does the thing work from the other end, and how should we write these requests for proposals to really, and that is the biggest challenge we have in procurement. How do you write it so then you get a response and get done exactly what you need?
Yeah, I'll tell you the way I did it is I put, we have what's called the mission suitability score. I don't know if you have that same jargon. It's the scoring of the how well the proposal meets the requirements. It's typically the governing factor in the selection. And I would make like it's usually technical. I'd make 1/3 of that score cost realism. In other words, I want the real cost. I don't want the buy-in cost, because the buy-in cost is, as a government employee, it's going to cause me pain later. So I would force a lot of the scoring into what is the reality of your cost estimate, and heavy penalties once we start to implement if they didn't meet those goals. So I was more interested in the real cost than I was in a fictional cost to buy in. That was not most people's approach, but that's how I did it.
So what you mean? I mean, we have a like financial term is the total cost of ownership. So if you take a simple example, if you're buying a printer is really cheap, but the ink is really expensive. So when you buy a cheap printer, you'll end up paying a lot more over the life. So that's the concept you're talking about.
Yeah, so we always did life cycle cost.
Yep.
It's the same problem. If you buy a Hubble telescope and it's going to operate for 20 years, what's gonna be the cost to operate it, and
Yeah.
put that in the equation, which is generally people prefer to ignore it. But
Plus there is also now the cost to dismantle, to just do
Yeah,
all
that's
the,
right.
like, just, so it's like cradle to grave cost.
that's right. So, but good, thank you. Okay, yep. Is in your experience, is the government orange? Is that what you're saying?
Well, we do have, it's interesting when we do these testing, we do have people all over the map. And we do actually have a number like that. In finance, we have people who are blue. So it's really
Yeah,
interesting
I'm
how,
talking about the how you do things, the culture in aggregate. Do you reward people for cheap overruns? That's what blue would do. Or do you reward people for getting things done on cost and schedule? How's the organization reward people?
well, it's really getting things done first and foremost. I mean, many times in government, there's like a long startup process and then it goes nowhere. So, I mean, the first thing is to get it done. And then next thing is, of course, getting it done on the money and on the schedule. And I mean, IT projects being the worst of all.
They're the worst.
Yeah.
A friend of mine was making charts of a defense contractor of the price of jet airplanes. And he was showing how the price, the A-35 jet being the latest example of this, the price was going up astronomically. And he said, if you look at the curve, the way the price is increasing, that means if this continues, that airplanes would reach infinite weight. So somebody had to invent something that has zero weight and infinite cost. Software.
That's awesome.
Charlie, I had an experience in my last position at NASA that kind of fits your blue-orange thing. I never looked at it in that perspective, of course, getting exposed to it just now, but it was a license agreement that I got pulled into licensing some technology from NASA to a company. And I worked for the center director at the time, and he asked me, "Can you go figure this out? These guys are ready to walk away, and this is a big deal. We don't understand why it's not working." And at the time, I just looked at it as I had a lot of business experience in government, so I looked at it as it's just a jargon problem. They're not listening to the business needs and responding. They're doing the usual government. This is the way we do it. Take our terms and leave it. So I had a conversation. And now when I'm looking at your lens, I realize I also did a lot of relationship building with them and realized that they're very performance oriented. They didn't want to pay a lot of upfront fees and they didn't want minimum royalties. They wanted to be judged based on what kind of sales and revenues they got and how much they could pull back in terms of licensing revenue back to NASA. So I restructured the deal and closed it. And the center director called me in the next day, and he was like, "What did you do?" And I just said, "I just translated."
Who was the center director?
Jim Free.
Okay, I didn't know him well. Okay,
he's at headquarters now.
yeah.
And my interpretation was I just was a translator. I translated, government to business and business to government, and we closed the deal. But now I'm kind of seeing now your lenses and realizing I was really kind of making that matchup, like you said. These were really blue kind of business people, and they were sitting around with a bunch of orange government licensing folks and not getting anywhere, and they got frustrated and they were ready to walk.
Yeah, good. Thank you.
So Charlie, we only have a couple of minutes left.
Yep.
Is there any way to really make peace and close the deal between green and blue? It looks like it's very challenging.
So I think, as I said yesterday, for individuals, I think it works if you both have a primary function of intuiting. I think for me, that's the boundary I switch over. For organizations, I think it's the green to orange is the most difficult, just like the individuals. They're almost antithetical. you know. The blue-green's problematic, but I don't think that's, in terms of cultures, I don't think that's much of a problem, because I don't think there are really any green organizations. So I mentioned before, you could argue training organizations should be very green. But if they're just green, they go out of business. They've got to have enough orange to make profit and do accounting and manage resources. I had a very orange friend who was a very talented guy who was hired by Greenpeace to be the CEO. And I said, enjoy it, it's not going to last long. And sure enough, 3 months later, they booted him out. He wanted to talk about the financials and the money, and they weren't interested in that. They wanted to talk about saving the planet. So the culture antibodies will come out, but I think they're really, only yellow business I know is Ricardo Stemler's book. And if anyone's interested, I'll find a link to it on this. It describes a yellow culture. It also went out of business, he claimed, for different reasons. So at 10 o'clock, we're going to stop now. We'll open, anyone has comments through the week about this, or talk to yourselves or send me an email. We sort of wrapped up the colors with first personalities and then cultures. Now we're going to look at projects next, the same thing. So thank you all. I'll see you next week.
Thanks, Charlie.
Thank you, Charlie.
Everybody.
Thank you
Bye, everyone.
all.
Thank you, Charlie. Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Okay.